If you can finish like a quarter after, that's great, but if it's a little bit longer, yeah, we'll take a break or we can absorb it. All right, cool. I'm gonna go try to get the other track. They're going too fast, which is easy to fix. They can just slow down.
Does that make
Yeah, both tracks are being recorded.
All right, I'm looking around the room. I don't see anyone under the age of 18. If there's anyone under the age of 18, please let me know now. Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm going to give an opening statement and you'll understand why I'm concerned about the age of 18. At the VIP dinner last night, I had a discussion with a couple of guys about, what in the hell are you doing talking about cybersecurity? You're just a damn lawyer. What do you know? And I said, well, let me explain it along these particular lines. I've been speaking at Black Hat and DEF CON, I hate to admit it, for about 20 years. DEF CON was year 26 this past year. And I've spoken at all 26 with the exception of the year before. So I've been in this game for a long, long time. Started very early, and I'll come back to that, but I really want to tell you a story about the Bellagio. The Bellagio is probably one of the, as far as I'm concerned, one of the nicest hotels in Las Vegas. And one of the reasons I like that hotel is because it's classy. Now during Black Hat and DEF CON, there are a lot of individuals that are very interested in entertaining you in a private capacity. And that is particularly true when you wander around the place called Caesar's Palace. And usually it's a tag game that will come up, two for the price of one, theoretically. So I'm walking back to my room, and of course in the Bellagio, there's a channel for hotel for the elevators. And there's a security dude that checks to make sure you've got a room key before they'll let you in. They do that to kind of screen people. As I was walking toward the elevators, this stunning woman was coming toward me. I could not resist looking at her. I mean, I'm a guy. And as I was walking, she turned around and put her arm in mine and said, let's go up to your room and I'm just going to say, educate each other. I was shocked. And my response was, okay, I'm a lawyer, I have a character flaw, I'm honest. And I should let you know that I charge $500 an hour. She withdrew her arm, stood in front of me, and she said, if I thought you could entertain me for an hour, I'd pay you $500. All right. That's a way of getting your attention so that you'll listen to me, because now you think I've got something to share, and I do. My job is to entertain and inform you for the next 42 minutes, and I'm not going to charge you. John has done a phenomenal job of bringing out tremendous speakers. You're not going to get this caliber of speakers, and I'm not referring to me, I'm referring to the ones that spoke yesterday, the ones that spoke this morning, and the ones that are going to speak this afternoon. World class. You don't even get that kind at Black Hat and DEF CON. So this is absolutely phenomenal here. The other thing that I feel strongly about with John is that he's doing so much for kids, the next generation. And if you don't cultivate them now, you're going to lose them. Particularly both young men and young women. If you don't capture their attention by the time they hit puberty, they're not going to be interested in this area. So you've got to capture them early and work it. I met a young lady who was here with her father earlier, Elizabeth. I can remember her name because my daughter's name is Elizabeth also. I need things like that. For example, I can remember my name because I've been using it for so many years. But early on, I took my son when he was in high school with me to Black Hat and DEF CON. Now, he didn't go to learn, he went to meet people. So his job was to escort speakers to various places. Now, what did he learn from that? He got to meet a lot of fascinating people and enthused about a career path where he can make money and not rely on dad as an ATM machine. And he's now head of IT at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. So, recruit him young, train him right. Hang on, we're not there yet. All right, I've got to establish a little bit of credibility with you. How many of you got a copy of this book? How many of you have looked at page 2? The foreword by the author? I commend that to your attention because there's a fellow in there by the name of Richard Marshall that he compliments. That would be me. All right. How many of you have heard of the pit? You're going to hear more about it this afternoon. I'm not going to steal Jeff's thunder, but pay attention to Jeff when he talks about the pit. And I know you know about the pit as well. I think you cut your teeth there at one time as well. When I was the Associate General Counsel for Information System Security at NSA, I didn't know jack about IT. It was kind of like electricity. You turned the switch on, it worked. But since I was advising them on the legal implications of what they were doing, legalized hacking, I took the notion that maybe I ought to know what they're doing rather than just pulling an opinion off the chandelier. So they took me to a place called the Pit, which is where they train hackers. So I'm an NSA trained hacker. I'm no good anymore. But when I graduated, I knew enough to impress people at cocktail parties at a minimum. But more importantly, that technical understanding helped me when it came time to set up an exercise called Eligible Receiver 97. How many of you have heard of that? I'm not surprised because it's faded in time. It happened way back in 1997, when I think you mentioned it in passing in your comments as well, and I know Jeff will also. But Eligible Receiver was the very first information warfare exercise against a warfighting Satan here in the United States. All of the lawyers in DOD said it was illegal to do it. I was considered, and I'm just stating what people said, not necessarily an opinion that I shared, but I'm willing to share it with you, that I was the very first cyber lawyer in the United States, because I figured out a way how you can legally hack into government systems without committing a felony. So we had about 12 people buried between 12 and 15 using techniques that we downloaded from the internet, checked them in the lab to make sure it was safe to use, and brought down a warfighting sink within a matter of days. I commend you to look at that in Google. There's been a couple of books written about it. I've been interviewed extensively for those books, deep background in the back. One of the books mentions me by name on one page, and it tells how NSA thought I was a spy and I was being investigated by security because of my unusual practices. I would come to work during the day, do my day-to-day stuff, pretend to go home, come back after hours and go in, because this was a tightly held exercise. About a dozen people knew about it. And then I would do my legal work at night. And they said, God, Marshall comes in at 8 o'clock in the evening and leaves at 3. He's obviously a spy. So it was a bit awkward to get called in by the security folks. It can be very disruptive to your future plans. Because the F word is felony, and that's a year or more in jail. That's not fun. Okay, I'm going to talk about some cyber myths, secure network challenges, and solutions. And most of what I'm going to tell you, I've drawn from other people that I've talked to. These are not necessarily absolutes. These are things to think about And I'm willing to treat this as a seminar and have some open discussion in a controlled way to stay on time. But I just want you to think about some of these possibilities. I'm going to talk about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But I'm also a believer in a solution. So I'm going to offer some policy considerations that you might find that we perhaps can implement. And that concept dates back to my days working in the White House when I helped develop the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which, if it had been adopted way back then, a lot of the problems that we have now would not have occurred. And you're asking yourself, well, why wasn't it adopted? It's because it was over-coordinated. Every government agency wanted to talk about it and protect their own little rice bowl, their own little turf. And as a result, it got watered down. It's kind of like getting a really good shot of whiskey in a bar, and they put ice in it and keep it for an hour before they give it to you. It's just not worth drinking as far as I'm concerned. Okay, let's go with the slide and see what happens. All right, attribution is impossible, not feasible, not worth the effort. I used to believe that as an absolute truth. I don't anymore. That's my bias. I likened it to a dog chasing a car. What in the hell is the dog going to do when it catches the car? You do attribution, what do you do with it? If it's a nation state, are you going to tell them, I got you? And the nation state's going to say, wait a minute, admit nothing, deny everything, and demand absolute proof. They want to know what technology you discovered or used to identify them. So that has a chilling effect on you sharing that information and accusing your adversaries. The other aspect about attribution is, well, it's only good enough if you're going to take it to court. That's the FBI's, is the FBI still here? The FBI is very good at that. They want hard evidence, but attribution, assuming they can get jurisdiction for criminal prosecution. But very rarely do you have that degree of detail in attribution. And I would suggest to you, it's interesting, but it's almost like the theoretically possible as opposed to the actionable reality. The main reason you're interested in attribution is to see who might be doing this and what kind of techniques might they use. Bank robbers use a similar MO. They come into a bank, they have a gun, they threaten to kill you, and they ask for money. That is an indicator that it's a bank robbery. That's attribution. You don't really have to follow them home and find the money with them. And I'm suggesting that when you're trying to protect your systems, just know the type of adversary that you're dealing with, because that'll help style your reaction. You want to spend a lot of money to go after an ankle biter who's a crypt kiddie, who's just using stuff that is downloaded? Or is this a more sophisticated adversary where you need to bring in more professional services? Anyone want to comment on attribution? And again, I'm not presenting absolutes. These are just things to think about. All right, I love this one. I spend a lot of time in front of boards and senior executives trying to talk their language. Their language is a language of business, not cyber. You say cybersecurity to a board of directors, and they think two things: money being wasted. I mean, one guy said it's like buying an insurance policy and not dying. Oh, okay. Wasted money. And then they'll say, okay, that's a technical issue, that belongs to the propeller heads, don't bother me, give it to the CISO and the CISO. And they're overwhelmed because they're not getting the support financially and politically that they need from the board of directors. So what language do I use when I talk to the board of directors? I speak their language. One of the words they love, absolutely love, is diligence. Diligence is not an appendage. They're thinking due diligence when they're doing an M&A. They want to know everything about it. And so I tell them, diligence is a leadership attribute. Boards of directors love being leaders. So they say, I'm going to do diligence. And the other buzzword to use with them is business resilience. Now, does that ring a bell? Does that make your heart jump as opposed to cybersecurity? What makes you happier? And so you need to use their language. One of the things that just absolutely frustrates me is they'll say, I have nothing on my system that the adversary is going to be interested in. And that's why I invoke the North Dakota legal doctrine of bullshit. Or heifer dust. If you've got data on your machine that deals with your business, you need to protect it, because if somebody disrupts it, you're out of business. This is not the old days where you had pen and pencil writing stuff down on paper, or as some companies still do, chisel and stone. It's all data, and it needs to be protected. And then I get the result of, well, I don't need to protect everything, do I, Rich? Just the stuff that's important. Well, now that's a fascinating thought. That reminds me of my college roommate who only studied the questions that he thought the professor would ask. And even though the professor didn't ask those questions, that was the answers that he gave. Because he took the view, if my answers were heavy enough in terms of pages, I'd get a good grade. Even if you just focus on protecting the most critical data in your system, that will not necessarily keep the bad guys out. Why is that? You're a sports fan? Okay. What is the most critical thing for a sports team to do? Win. And how do they win? They score points. And how do they score points? They find a way to get to the goal line, right? And sometimes you go where the strength is in the defense line, deception. But what you're after is scoring a goal. So using some examples within the last 3 years, it wasn't the goal line that the attackers went after. They went after the HVAC system. They went after somebody else that was connected to that company because of the entry threshold. And then because everything is so interconnected, they were able to weasel their way through, going from a lowly protected place to one that was more highly protected, at least in theory. So the conundrum is you've got to protect it all. But of course, from a business standpoint, you want to put most of your financial assets protecting the most critical, realizing that in order to protect the most critical, you've got to make sure you know who you are connected with. Let's see, nobody here is under 18. So it's kind of like practicing safe sex. Knowing who you're getting together with and taking appropriate, proactive, prophylactic prescriptions to make sure you're not infected. That's not bad. I said that okay. Information sharing is the answer. How many believe that? Good. I'm glad I'm here with a bunch of agnostics. When I was at DHS as the Director of Global Cybersecurity Management, and in Washington, the longer the title you have, the less responsibility you have. When president is one word, right? The big push was information sharing. If NSA and DHS would just share vulnerability information with us, we can adequately protect ourselves. No, for 100 reasons. Normally, the more sophisticated targets like banks know more about what's going on than DHS. And they sure as hell know more about what's going on in their banking system than NSA. And you're looking at me like, how is that possible? Because NSA could give a rat's fur coat about the banking system. That's not one of their targets. Their targets are foreign adversaries not trying to protect domestic infrastructure. So there's a real conflict there. We'll come back to that in a moment. Cyber tool proliferation is inevitable, no lasting defense. I think we've talked about that a lot yesterday and again today. I don't necessarily believe that. I think you always have to try to be on the cutting edge to do something to protect yourself. You know, it's kind of like the old spy versus spy thing in Mad Magazine, if anybody remembers that. You have to do something to be proactive to develop some resilience in your systems. All right, let's go to the next slide. Let's see, I've got to move along quickly. Problems easily solvable, install my program. How many of you are vendors? Other than you, because I know you have amazing integrity and you would never stoop so low as to try to sell your program here. But there are so many vendors that will say, it's not a problem. Just pay me to plug in your stuff, protect it, and you're good. And that is not enough. And I'm not putting vendors down. But you need to carefully evaluate which vendor's technology you're going to use to make sure there's a nice fit. It's absolutely ridiculous for me to walk around in a spacesuit. I'm more comfortable in normal street clothes. The spacesuit would protect me, but from what? Walking around Iowa? Hell, it would get me arrested for being crazy. All right, offense is easy, defense is hard. Yeah, the jury's always out on that. Depends on what side of the puzzle that you try to push. Defense is hard, offense is hard as well. Why do you think governments spend so much money trying to develop exploitation techniques? Because offense is hard. And going back to attribution, if you can understand the technology and the techniques that are being used for offense, it puts you in a better position to develop a good defense because of resilience. You want to keep those business systems online so you can continue to generate income so that you can pay people who are working there so they can pay taxes so the government can give it away. Cyber attacks occur at the speed of light. How many believe that? Really? You just want me to pick on you? How fast can you type?
Oh, God.
No, how many words a minute? A scientific pseudo-wild-ass guess. How many words a minute? 100 words a minute. All right, is that the speed of light? No. Hackers can't type at the speed of light. Maybe they type at 100 words a minute. My experience is they type a lot less because they're kind of thinking about what they're going to do. So don't get overwhelmed and say, this is too fast. And on the response, people will say, well, it's all done by machines. How can we protect against that? Again, if you understand how the attack vector is happening and the threat actors, you're much better to say, here's what we can do to keep them out or distract them or make life miserable for them. Just keep the bad guys out. Oh yeah, that's the mantra. That's great. And then of course the last thing is, it's impossible. The best thing you can do is pray that they go away. It's not hopeless. You know, you can't walk around with cranial inversion. You've got to take a proactive approach. All right, let's go. Here are the challenges, and they've been talked about today. Critical infrastructure systems are, greater number and severity. Okay. Why? Because we don't care. We don't do enough about it. When you look at SCADA systems, they're not owned by the government. They're owned by the private sector. If you're looking at the electric distribution system in the United States, it's roughly divided into 3 quadrants. Texas and North, East Coast, West Coast. They pretend to talk to each other, but because they're business, they're not going to give each other a business advantage. And they're also very concerned about the government doing something that will interfere with them trying to be a monopoly. So they spend the absolute minimum to keep the systems functioning. Now that's a good business case. Banks do that all of the time. Bank fraud. Is it more expensive to protect bank fraud or it is to just to pay it? And they use that as a dynamic. If we lose $1,000 on a credit card transaction and it will cost us $1,500 to prevent it, guess what the math is going to show? Let it go. Write it off. They get a tax write-off, they get a business write-off, and they get to pass it on to the customers, servicing the customer. Do that with higher interest rates and late charges and stuff that airlines do to try to make more money as well. Here's my pet peeve. Security standards are advisory. Everybody says, well, if we just follow the security standards, everything would be perfect. Again, bull roar. All of the security standards, all of them, without exception, are advisory. And what did we learn yesterday from Ira? If it's advisory, it ain't gonna get done. You gotta go from must to should, thou shalt. And remember also, security standards are always billed as the best solution. Well, they're done by committee, and it's a compromise. Best practices are a cheap out. They're a compromise. Now, that doesn't mean throw out the standards, because there's so many of them, you can choose one, and it helps. But take that standard and tailor it to your specific situation. Convert the you should to thou must in the appropriate circumstances. And that's going to require a little bit of thinking. And it also would encourage you to bring in an outside consultant to help you do that, right, Ira?
I agree.
Now, I'm doing that, he isn't, all right? Ira's a friend of mine, so I can pick on him. Infrastructure data is aggregated. We've got a great presentation from Tony on the information of things and how dangerous that is, linked without regard to risks. We understand that. Now let's go to the next slide. And I think I'm going to be on time. We really don't know who we're connected to. We talked a little bit about safe cyber. Infrastructure attacks by foreign entities is a constraint on our foreign policy. We have enough of that in the news, so I don't need to discuss that anymore. The difficulty is knowing whether it's an active enemy state or someone pretending to be the enemy state. The false flag issue that Tony talked about is complex, but you need to be sensitive and aware of that. Now, here's where I get a lot of pushback from my lawyer buddies, from my policy wonks, not so much from the technical side. This is not a technical issue that resolves a technical solution. How many of you agree with that? Oh, come on, you're not that. I'm teasing you. It is more than that. A heck of a lot more than that. It's legal, commercial, and political. What do I mean by that? I'm going to go into the Talking History Channel mode for a moment. I think Tony used an example of the Transcontinental Railroad. No, somebody did today. Anyway, Transcontinental Railroad connected the East and the West here in the United States. I mean, we remember that from our 4th or 5th grade history, right? Now, when those railroads were developed, they had steam engines that created a lot of fire. They were wood burning initially, and then later coal burning. As they would drive down the railroad, sparks would fly. And they'd come to a place like Iowa, where there's a lot of cornfields adjacent to railroad tracks. And guess what? The cornfields caught on fire. It became popcorn. Now the farmers were upset, but they were small business people. Notice I used a polite phrase, business people as opposed to businessmen. Shows how sensitive I am. I'll tell you another story about that if we have time later. So the farmers couldn't do anything about it. But a lot of the small towns, and every small town, no matter how small, has at least 2 lawyers. You gotta have 2 lawyers in a town, one to fight for you and one to fight against you. And the lawyer said, let's sue the railroads for starting a fire. Let's hold them liable for the damages that they're doing. And the railroad's defense was, well, we can't help it. This is the way the systems are designed. You just have to suck it up. And the farming community said, no, we're not happy with that result. If you cause damages, you have to pay for it. That's standard tort law. Meaning if something bad happens, you got to pay. It's an interesting theory. Sometimes it works. So over time, because the railroads were going into so many of these lawsuits about fires that they were starting, they started to use screens to keep a lot of the cinders from flying out of the chimney and damaging the farms. Why don't we do the same damn thing with software? How many of you have been around long enough to remember the early development of software with shrink wrap and what shrink wrap says? You're not buying software. You're getting a license to use as is. And if you don't use it properly, tough timber toes. Now here again, we've got the conundrum of a small business person not being in a financial position to sue, let's say, a major software developer in the northwestern portion of the country. It ain't gonna happen. They're protected. So one approach that I would suggest is when you buy software, when you lease software, when you do a contract, a procurement option for software, shift this responsibility for purity on the person who's selling it to you or a person who's making it available to you. That will have a chilling effect in making sure that the software that you are being permitted to use is more secure. Now, you're saying, Rich, that's a dream. And I'm going to say, no, it's not a dream. Germany successfully did it against Microsoft. They said, we are not going to use your software unless you start making security improvements. And they did. It just takes a little bit of market force to help it happen. So it's not completely impossible. Do we have another slide? This is the last one, right? Okay. Eligible receiver 97, lessons learned. There was a president who took very grave concerns about the fact that his warfighting capability was brought down by about a dozen little hackers from NSA. His name was Bill Clinton. And he said, we got to take this cybersecurity stuff seriously. So he appointed a guy known as Richard Clark, who was the acting president in the exercise, who became a cybersecurity expert as a result of that exercise. So I like to say I invented Richard Clark, and I've said that to his face. It's got to start from the top. Now, I'm not saying it's got to start in the White House. Sure as hell ain't going to start in Congress, because they can't. They're not as efficient as perhaps we would like them to be. But how about your CDO? How about your CTO? How about your Chief Procurement Officer? The last thing you want, and this is going to be covered by my friend Michael, is you don't want the government coming in telling you how to protect your systems. That results in an anal suppository, as he will tell you. All right, we talked about the legal system, vector software, avoid liability, commercial decision, more cost-effective to accept loss and prevent, government policy lacks the political will to address the issues. Congress is not going to do it, the White House is not going to do it. We have to do it through market forces. And if we combine and raise enough interest in this problem, we can help affect a solution. Okay, I got 4 more minutes. I think I better quit there. I'll get into trouble saying something else that I will regret. Anybody have questions, comments? I am absolutely shocked. Yes, sir.
How does Microsoft German software differ, if at all, from what we buy here in the good old USA?
I don't know the accurate answer to that, but I can share two experiences with you when I was at NSA. I went out to Microsoft. Remember, I'm on the InfoSec side to protect. NSA has two missions that are joined at the hip. One is to exploit, one is to protect. But in order to exploit or protect, you have to know the vulnerabilities. So the two sides cooperate to understand vulnerabilities. I was on the protect side. So I went out to Redmond. I can tell this story. I went out to Redmond and sat down with their general counsel and said, you know, we're special. NSA is always special. We need our own design system to help protect our systems, not just for NSA, but DoD. And he looked at me as if I were Win Schwartau, who just finished a big one. You know, Willie Nelson size stick. And he said, but you don't spend enough money. I said, on contract. That's right.
Yes.
Our business spends a lot of money on Microsoft, so you should be responsive to us. And his answer was, you're looking at the wrong end of the telescope. And I said, no, I'm not. Here's the eyepiece. I'm looking at the moon. The moon is big. And he said, no, you need to be standing on the moon looking the other way, because you're small. Your budget is nothing. We don't even need your business. The Germans were able to put enough pressure on Microsoft, not just in the government systems, but in their business systems. They have a little more centralized control over things like that than we do here in the United States, good, bad, or indifferent. So they were able to affect change. I think most of it was cosmetic. I don't know that it was all that realistic, but it gave Microsoft bragging rights, and the German government had bragging rights, so everybody was happy. One other Microsoft story. Yeah, I got 2 more minutes. Microsoft came to us and said, we would like you to evaluate our system and help make it more secure. What a great opportunity. And I just jumped on that. And I went to the director and I said, we have an opportunity to make the world a better place for NSA having been here. Microsoft is willing to give us all of the information about their system so we can modify to provide more security. We're going to give us the source code. And then we're going to let us look at it ourselves, not look at it in their environment. Man, this is awesome. So we looked at it, and this was under the common criteria, which tells you how long ago this was. No, this was under the Rainbow series. Common criteria was later. I was involved in both of those, which is esoteric. You don't really need, that's not testable. But the idea was Microsoft was so pleased with the recommendations that we made that they wanted to put it on their shrink wrap that NSA had evaluated their software and found it to be secure. Here's the rest of the story. Everything that we suggested they do, they said, it's not a business advantage. We're not going to spend the money to do it. But there was a compromise. They wanted the NSA seal of approval on their shrink wrap. And what we settled on was this product is safe to use in a non-IT environment. All right, Michael has come up to the stage, which is a sign that I'm to step down. But I'm just a warm-up act for Michael. He has got the best story you'll ever have. He's got a great book. Don't buy the book. Go to the library. I have to say that, so I'm not commercial. But I'll tell you how good the book is. I picked it up on a Friday, and I read it straight through to Saturday night. Now, I admit I'm a lawyer, and I was kind of intrigued with all of this. But there's a lot of technical stuff in there that will give you heart palpitations. And the boring legal stuff you can kind of skip through. I read every single word. And what he's going to tell you about today is a summary of that that's updated. It is just absolutely riveting. How's that for an intro?